Well, I'm really excited. We have Casey Rudzinski here with us, and he has a really cool story. We got a chance to talk a little bit earlier this week. He's somebody I've seen from a distance, and just a few of his key characteristics that I saw, I'm a big fan of, and a lot of it relates to athletes. And Casey has a good, strong passion for athletes, and it comes from a pretty cool story that I got to learn a little bit about. But first off, Casey, I want to thank you for joining and taking the time to come on the show. And if you don't mind, man, just give us a little introduction about who you are and a little about you.
Yeah, appreciate you for having me on. Thanks. Carrying on this conversation, I guess you could say. I guess the quick snippet of who I am and kind of where I'm at now, and then we could kind of work backwards a little bit. Casey Rudzinski, currently, I reside in Florida. I am a professor at the graduate level for sport management and leadership program. Um, and I'm also a researcher for an organization that advocates and works for student athletes and athlete mental health and providing resources. Also to athletic directors, coaches, parents, and the athletic community at large. So that's where I'm at now, but my backstory is over a decade in athletics, various roles, athletic director, coach, um, game manager, you name it, I've probably done it. Worked in K through 12 education, different roles, um, all the way from instructional assistant to a teacher to being on boards and being a delegate. And so that's majority of my background, and there's some crossover in between different areas.
Yeah, so majority an educator, I would say, right?
Hmm.
Someone who just enjoys teaching.
Hmm.
Is that something that has always been you? Is that a passion that you've always kind of had,
Yeah,
growing up? And
yeah, it's interesting you bring up that point because years ago, when I segued into like teaching, like proper education, whatever, um, I told my mom, and I basically was just like, "Hey, guess what I'm doing?" Because she was the first person to tell me at like 18 years old, "You're really good at working with kids. You have patience. You make a great teacher." And at the time, I was like, "No way, absolutely not."
yeah,
And fast forward to that moment in time, I guess my mom knew something that mother's intuition. And so that teaching characteristic actually carried over to athletics and coaching. And coaches will tell you coaching is teaching, and teachers will tell you teaching is also coaching, right? They go hand in hand.
yeah,
Um,
yeah,
and so that's just something I've always loved to do, even not just in a classroom. It's just like anytime I have an opportunity to teach something, even if it's in an informal setting, I love just like um, spreading knowledge about different subject areas.
yeah. Do you see a relation? Because you mentioned you coached, and then obviously as a professor, do you see um, a similarity between a coachable athlete? You hear that term a lot. A coachable athlete, and let's say a good student, for whatever that could be, a wide range of things. But is there a correlation that you've been able to tap into where you just say, "Hey, this student gets it, or this athlete gets it"?
Yeah, I think there's some aspects and some characteristics of not necessarily like we get caught in this term of like high academic, right? You don't necessarily need to be like a straight A student to be like great athlete, but I think the characteristics thinking about like work ethic, right? Are you putting in the
Yeah,
time and effort? Do you listen? Are you motivated? Are you asking questions? Are you engaging with your classmates, aka teammates? Um,
yeah,
so some of these things, like I think there is a crossover. And looking back, some of my, I would say, best success stories in terms of student athletes that I've had the privilege of coaching, they just so happen to also be great students in the classroom. And so
yeah.
I could always count on them in terms of leadership roles too. Just providing them opportunities to do things um, in the school. You know what I mean? It's
Yeah.
like, hey, go check on such and such, or I'm not at the school right now. Can you go ask this teacher this question? And so
Yeah.
they're definitely reliable.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And I think that's a huge part. I mean, listen, I wasn't a great student, so I know that one doesn't go with the other. But I would say I was a student of the game. For me, it was baseball, and even football while I played it. I was a student of the game. It's what had my interest. But I know for now that I'm older, there's a lot that translates that made me a good athlete. And I was always told that I was coachable, and I took pride in that. And I think that's a lot because of the coaches that I had out when I was younger. I didn't really have a choice. I played for some tough teachers and coaches, but for sure, it was a lot of skills that crossed over, and then I was able to rely on in college to help me balance both of that, athletics and academics. Were you an athlete? Did you play when you were younger?
Yeah, I played my first sport was actually baseball or t-ball. And actually,
Yeah.
the neighborhood I grew up in, the first sport that I was put onto was softball. And so I grew up in a neighborhood that had a lot of Italian American influence, and so they used to have an adult league for softball. And so when I started playing t-ball, I was like, why is this ball so small? Because I didn't know any
Yeah.
different, right? And so I mean that didn't make me a better player, but it was interesting to me. So my first
Yeah.
sport was baseball, and then I think around fourth grade, so that's probably like 10 years old or somewhere around there, I started getting interest in basketball. So playing Y ball, just watching the game. And then I made the transition from baseball to basketball as my primary sport. Probably like at 11, I started to get serious more towards middle school. And even in high school, I still, I was still exploratory. So I played tennis a little bit in high school because I wanted to
Nice.
work on my lateral movement. You know what I mean? Defensive slides, and tennis is a lot of moving side to side, up and down,
Yeah.
footwork. And I just wanted to try something different. I played recreationally with some family members, so tried tennis. But as far as basketball goes, my career wasn't the typical path. I grew up playing in the park, playground basketball. So when I could put in when I was put in like a proper organizational setting, I wanted to do things that they didn't normally do. It's like system basketball, and so I had to learn
Yeah.
that. It was a learning curve to that. Um, and so I ended up getting to high school, and I played a little bit of high school basketball, and then I started segueing to like different leagues, different more like rec leagues, um, and then eventually just making the choice ultimately not to be a student athlete at the college level, and
Mm-hmm.
um, just surrounding myself with the sport I love by majoring in it. And so that was my choice. Decided to have the student experience at a Division I school,
Yeah.
and then kind of go that route instead.
That's interesting that you say that. So when you say you decided to major in it, what does that mean? What did you decide to go with?
Yeah, so sport and recreation management. Shout out to Temple University, my alma
Hey,
mater,
Temple. There
if
you
in
go.
Philly. Philly was the one of the first programs to combine sport and recreation into one major. I believe Penn State was one of the other schools across the country that did that, but it again going back to like it's nice to have a few options. It wasn't like a linear path, and um, during my time as a student, I actually interned with the Philadelphia Department of Recreation. So I wanted to see other areas outside of just the sports environment, right? And so even in the recreational setting, I was able to kind of go back to my roots and supervise like outdoor basketball games, like playground basketball, but with structure, right? So it was kind of like a full circle moment for me. Um,
Yeah.
and so it was a great experience, and I recommend anyone that's interested to look into that as a potential major. If it's something
Yeah.
that you love or enjoy, you could always surround yourself in that environment, whether it's at the sport or whether it's like something specific like marketing or whatever. And so there's
Right.
opportunities to be involved, not just as a player.
Yeah, I want to highlight that. I think that's so important. It's the sports world is so deep and there's so many layers, and some of the best experiences come off of the playing field or playing court. There's a good amount of stresses that come with being an athlete and being, in it and on it. And I wouldn't trade it in for the world. I mean, I loved it. I loved my experiences. Some of my best friends or my friends from college, from teammates. You go through things that no one else can experience. You guys go, you go through it together, but that's not for everybody. And that doesn't necessarily mean if your skill set can do it. There's a lot of people who have the skill set, but maybe just don't have the passion, or maybe just want to have the college experience and understand that this would be the end of the road for me anyway, and I want to get onto something different in my life or explore something that I enjoy. I know I enjoy. So I really commend people who can take a step back and look at that and then get started on that path. And I want more athletes to be aware of that, right? The playing of the game is not the end all be all. There's so many different avenues to go off of that can keep you in it, keep your passion there, keep the love for it. Not to skip over too much, but so right now you're in research, right?
Mm-hmm.
And particularly what in regards to what?
Real quick before we dive into this, I just want to highlight something to piggyback off of what you said too.
Yeah.
For those that actually want to play, want to continue playing, I would also add to that there's opportunities not just in the U.S. but also in different countries where you could continue your passion. I think there's so much pressure nowadays to succeed at the college level, getting a scholarship, and then making the transition to professional. But there's a lot of leagues in the U.S. and you think about like minor league baseball was one
Yeah.
example. You think about semi-pro leagues for American football or soccer. So there's opportunities in the U.S., but then even so, there's opportunities abroad. So making that leap outside of the U.S., there's opportunities to go to a different country, gain different experiences, and still continue to play and do what you love for at least maybe a couple years if that's what you're interested in. And I would say
Yeah.
there's a lot of very competitive leagues too outside the U.S. And if you look at players more recently, your guy from the Los Angeles Dodgers, the Japan League for
Yeah.
baseball. Basketball, FIBA leagues are uber competitive in Europe. So there's opportunities to still
Yeah.
continue to do what you love outside the U.S. Or even in the U.S. It's just a matter of, what are my goals and, what do I want to do right now? But
Yeah. Not to cut you off though, that's a good point because you jogged my memory. Did you ever think about doing intramural sports when you were at Temple? Was that a thought for you, or did you not ever never think
I
about that?
actually did. I did intramural sports. It's funny you said that because we had different, very creative intramural sports. So we had ultimate, aka ultimate frisbee. I actually worked for campus
Yes.
recreation my senior year, but before that, I wanted to kind of start this process of like teaching and having fun, and so I couldn't really figure out what to do. And talked to a few of my friends who played basketball at the varsity level in high school, and they're like, "I gotta play. Like, we gotta do something." And
Yeah.
I looked into some leagues, and they actually had a co-ed intramural league. And so I
All
thought
right.
this is phenomenal because a lot of my female friends played at a high level in high school, and so I took on the moniker of player coach, so I could still kind
I
of
like that.
teaching process and what have you, but then also like hands on. I'm in the game, and it was a lot of fun. And I would
Yeah.
say intramurals are a great way to stay connected. And even today, like you have a lot of college programs that have practice players, or they need,
Hmm.
student athletes or former student athletes at the high school level to, help out with practices or, player development, things like this. So there's
Yeah.
so many ways to still be involved, and continue to do what you love.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We had somebody on, my buddy Jason Rodriguez. Shout out J Rod. He went to UPenn, and he was a player coach for the baseball team.
Hmm.
Now, he was in the Wharton School of Business,
Hmm.
and his professional career, like he was on a projectile. So, and he knew, like, he was an average high school baseball player. If you ask him, if you ask me, I think he was a stud. But he knew when he was going to college for, and he sounds a lot like you. And I think that's important to understand is there's there's that side of it too. And then also a good buddy of mine, he was a basketball manager at a Big East school, and I'll tell you what, he's as much as part of the team as the players on the team are. He's at every practice. He's on every road trip. He's on the recruiting visits. And again, he knew he wasn't going to play at St. John's, but he loved basketball and he wanted to be around it. And the connections and the network that he made from being the manager, he still takes advantage of today. And now he's a lawyer and he's a sports agent, and he's able to utilize all those connections that he made back then. But again, he just found a way to stay
And
involved, and I hear a lot of similarities with your story, which I really appreciate that, because I'll be honest, when I was younger, I don't know if it's because I was being recruited and I knew I was going to play, but I wasn't aware of all of that, or at least I didn't look through it at the same lens that I do now of the opportunities that are there outside of the playing field. So I really appreciate those of you that find ways just to stay involved and explore your passions, which obviously you're still doing today, which is really cool. And yeah, so tell us a little bit more about what it is you're currently doing.
yeah, so right now helping to build out more research and resources for student athletes, for athlete mental health, and not just student athletes, but also coaches, athletic directors. Obviously, mental health has been at the forefront of everyone in athletics for the past couple of years. But I started being a mental health advocate years ago, just not knowing really where to find resources or what to do, and so
Yeah.
I saw an opportunity to get certified in mental health first aid, and I recommend that a lot of coaches look into that. It's um, similar to how you would go through about the process of getting first aid for physical ailments. Um, you're not
Right.
an expert, but it teaches you what to do in a situation and how to deal with certain scenarios, and then if you're not equipped, then where to find the resources to get that help, right?
Right.
Because coaches are always at the forefront, right? Usually the first line defense with student athletes. And so I think it's important to really equip yourself with as many tools and whether it be certifications or workshops or whatever it is to help you, and that you feel
Yeah.
more equipped to do your job. Um, and so right now working with an organization, and it's interesting. I didn't realize how many organizations are in this space of athlete mental health, and it's grown so much, not just across the U.S. but internationally. And mental health first aid, for example, the program, like the actual structure of how it came about, actually came from Australia. It's where it started, and so
Interesting.
there are a lot of great countries that started doing a lot of the work and the process and the research long before it became a situation here. And so I think it's important
Yeah.
to always be aware of um, other other tools or workshops or other opportunities. I always try to like bring that back into my research, because what you're doing in one place, they could be doing in another place, and obviously could modify
Hmm.
things to fit your environment or your culture. But I
Yeah.
think it's important to talk about certain elements in mental health. One in particular is mental health literacy. I think everything starts with education. You don't
Hmm.
need to be an expert, but you definitely have to have like a fundamental understanding of, what things mean. And so
Yeah.
I think there's this preconceived notion of um, always outsourcing to the experts. When in fact, I think a lot of coaches and teachers too, they deal with this. Um, the students will go to them first. Like they may skip the
Yeah.
counselor, they may not talk to their parents, they may not even talk to their friends. But um, if coaches and teachers and parents to a degree could start to have a better understanding of, certain aspects of mental health, I think they'll
Hmm.
feel more equipped to deal with situations, and then also like refer those students that may need help to the experts whenever they need to, right? And not just
Yeah.
trying to take on too much, because I think there's a balance between knowing you're not the expert in a space, but also being equipped to be able to provide some sort of support when needed.
Yeah. That's interesting. You nailed it because I think in the reality, when you take a step back, let's just use college level, for example. I can tell you firsthand that playing for my coach, I looked at him as if he had all the answers, and I think most of us did. Mostly because of just the nature of the whole environment. That's the person you listen. That's the person you go to. They're telling you where to be, when to be, and there's this value in the coach not being a parent. They're not your friend. You kind of trust that they're going to tell you the truth, or at least the honest opinion. So you say mental health literacy. Is that something that you feel personally with exposure that almost anybody could benefit from? Because I know I don't want to take anything away from the professionals, because I know there's people who put a
Mhm.
lot of time into the mental health field.
Absolutely.
But it's interesting because my wheels are turning on. Like, what if universities made a requirement for all of their coaches to at least take a base level course? Is that something that you feel could be adopted, and mostly anybody benefit from at least knowing how to recognize and whatever the next steps are? Coaches specifically.
Yeah, well, that's actually something I did help for a previous organization getting across the finish line in Maryland for mental health training for coaches. I think it's important because um, anytime you have a problem, you know, it's there's always a solution. It's a matter of,
Mm-hmm.
are you the one solving the problem? Is it someone else? Are you working together? And I think we look at things that are so complex, and they don't really have to be complex, right? And if they are, like that's the experts. They know the deep dive on some of these topic areas, right? Um, but as far as the basic foundation of things, I think literacy, and it's not just mental health literacy, for example, right? It's financial literacy. It's
Mm-hmm.
you talk about health and wellness in terms of like nutrition and that sort of literacy. Um,
Right.
you can apply literacy to almost anything, but I think uh, just knowing a solid foundation of what terms mean, what the differences are, I think it's important so that you're also not giving the wrong information, right? You're not
Yeah.
um, causing more damage to the situation. But for
Yeah.
example, if you know, for example, there's a student athlete that has uh, a very specific situation, and you say, okay,
Mm-hmm.
I could identify the problem, and you know enough to know that I understand this, and I know I'm not the expert, and I'm not trying to be. That's phenomenal. Like you're essentially bridging the gap to get them to where they are, to where they need to be. And I think
Yeah.
that's, if you think about teachers, that's what teachers do. Freshman year to sophomore year, like it's the same thing. Um, you think about coaches, assistant coaches are teaching, whether it's the X's and O's or the nuances of a system, whether it be
Right.
defense or whatever, of what the head coach wants, right? And so
Right.
you always need these people to get students or student athletes from one point to another point, and it's not always you're not going to solve the problem overnight, but you're at least going to get them further along the way.
Yeah. What's your overall feel? This is a big question, but obviously, but what's your overall feel of the landscape from your standpoint, from the research standpoint of, and I'll keep using college because I think it's a
Mm-hmm.
controlled crowd to look at. Um, what's your overall standpoint? Do you think we have a long way to go in supporting athletes, or have we made a lot of progress in that, in your opinion, from what you know?
Yeah, I think it's both. Obviously, we've come a long way. If you look at where we're at now with name, image, likeness, NIL, the transfer portal, um, resources at the conference level for student athletes. Student athletes are receiving media training. There's so many things that they have now that they didn't have 5, 10, 20, 50 years ago, right? So we've really come a
Yeah.
long way. Um, on the flip side, there's still a lot of work that needs to be done. And I think it's not, everyone always has this focus that's NCAA Division One, right? It's like there's a lot of pressure on that. But then also, I think there's a lot of good things coming out of the Division Three level, right? In terms of setting the standards for academics and upgrading facilities and Division Two schools. There's a place for those too in terms of I look at student athletes and some might be on a partial athletic scholarship and they really have to find their niche or their role. But then also not forgetting about NAIA,
Yeah.
and so that's another big one. And then one that's closer to my heart, which is how I started my career, is junior college.
Okay.
Junior colleges are really the stepping stones for students to get some of those baseline skills, whether it be just living on your own or academics or
Yeah.
whatever it is. So I think we have a long way to go still, obviously, but I think looking at where we've been in the inception of college athletics, it's been there's been so much progress.
Yeah, I really encourage high school student athletes who do want to play at the next level to look at the full gamut of opportunities. I can tell you, I've been exposed to Division 3 and Division 1 and a little bit of JUCO just through the recruiting process of it. But the amount of control that the kid has to make a decision, it's all in your court. And some of these universities that you may have never heard of, honestly, you may have never heard of, have really good resources, from fields to academic support to coaches. And we know, and I fell subject to it, but we know the big name schools, the ones that we see on TV on Saturdays and the ones that we watch in March Madness. But across the country, there are schools that put a lot of emphasis in supporting not only definitely the students, but the student athletes, because it's a big population of their school and it's a huge driving force of their school. And whether it's D2 or D3, there's really quality sports down there, but the universities and the experiences are great. And not to get too far off topic, but I can tell you, for me, recruiting Division 3 we weren't able to offer money was easier at the school I was at than recruiting Division 1 when I was at a Division 1 university,
Mm.
because the Division 3 school, if as a parent, I could tell you this is what you can expect for your son to come play baseball here.
Mm-hmm.
This is what they're going to get. This is the coaching and support they're going to get, and it just made it that much easier. But that brings me to something. Is there what for a parent who's watching their kid go through this, and someone who their kid is 17, 18, and they're getting ready to make this big decision? Where am I going to go? Where am I going to continue my career, my education? How would you recommend, and every instance is different for sure, but how would you recommend a parent kind of guide that, right? Because I know there's sometimes a lot of kickback from teenagers, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you don't want to hear from your parents. And there's a balance to using your experience. You've been, most parents have been through it before, or at least know what they know through life. How would you recommend speaking to a teenager and somebody who's making that decision on where to go next with life.
Yeah, I think going back to the literacy piece, I think it's important for the parents to have the right information. So obviously, knowing what you're talking about is a good start, right? Knowing what are the standards, what's the difference between Division One, Two, Three, NAIA, all these things. So I think the parents need to have at least just a basic fundamental overview of the difference between a lot of these places, and also understanding that each school is different, right? And each environment is going to be different. Some schools are in cities, some are in countryside, and they already know these things if they went to school. But now you're just applying the athletic layers on top of that. And I would also say for parents, um, if they have a community of other parents of who had their children go on to play at that next level, whatever it may be, talk to those parents or reach out and try to find those communities of support and ask questions, because I think a lot of times parents will go through the process and they end up taking on the burden of what they do in parenting. It's they want to try to make sure that they're giving their best effort, but sometimes they may be missing like one or two pieces of information. And
Right.
I think it's important sometimes to extend out, reach out and say, hey, I don't know everything about this. Let me ask this other parent over here. And that's
Right.
anyone who's parented, they know it's like communities of support go a long way. Um,
Right.
and so I think, again, just starting with the basic fundamentals of what's the difference between all these situations, and then also asking questions and asking, figuring out what questions to ask, right? Because you can ask a lot of questions, but those questions may not necessarily help you. So it's like, what type of questions do you want to ask? And then also not asking just questions of people in athletics, asking people in admissions, asking people
Yeah.
who work at the school. I think sometimes um, we forget about like the bigger picture. And I think that's also
Yeah.
important too.
Incredibly important. I love what you just said, and you touched on just having a support system and not being afraid to go out and just ask. Ask questions, ask people who've been through it before. Would it be beneficial for everybody to at least tap into um, the mental health awareness or a mental health professional, whether you feel like you need to or not? Would you recommend just to have them a part of your support team, that you could benefit from it as just kind of like a checkpoint, even if you don't feel like you're struggling with something at that point? Would that be beneficial for somebody to do, a parent to recommend for their kid, or an athlete to do when you're already in college?
Absolutely. I think um, it's always important to have a third party, so that way
Yeah.
you can gain a better understanding from the expert, right? But then also too, that individual is, or they should be, unbiased. They should be objective to your situation. So, kind of bringing them into the fold, they can give a basic overview of, you know, how to go about the situation, because a lot of people think that therapists and counselors, they only deal with problems, right? Whether it be
Hmm.
like mental health issues such as anxiety, depression, so on and so forth. But if you think back to years ago when we didn't have a lot of these things in the forefront of the media, therapy was um, very much in, whether it's TV shows or whatever. And I think we forget, like, you could talk to people about anything. It doesn't have to be you have this problem or you think you have this problem. It could be just, I need some help navigating. What are your thoughts? Can you give me some sort of idea how to go about this? And the good thing about health professionals that they excel in is they have a network. So they have this referral system. So if they don't know the answer, they'll tap into their system of people that they know, and they'll say, hey, does anyone know about this? I have a client
Hmm.
who is looking for answers on this particular topic area. And so
Yeah.
I think when you're really gleaning the knowledge base of a health professional, you're not just getting information from that one professional, you may be getting from a wide variety of people in their network. And so I think
Yeah.
that's huge.
Yeah, and I don't think you truly know how transferable those skills are until you have them. And I say that because I think for athletes in particular, the hurdles that you face, you know, they're so particular to each individual, right? Because there's so many variables that are going on, especially through your college career. You know, it could be as something as simple as on the field, which I think everyone's mind goes to, oh, I'm producing or I'm not producing. And then, but when you're in it and you're in college, there's this whole world outside of just the playing field that you have to maintain and control and be on top of. And there's a few skills, and we were lucky in college. Our coach was pretty big on this, and this was not that. This was like 10, 15 years ago, and he was big. We would have man, he would kill me for forgetting what it was called, but every Saturday we would meet and we would talk, and I'll never forget. One of the things he did was he had us. We were struggling, you know, in the season, and he had us all sit in a room, and he made each one of us tell something about ourselves that had nothing to do with baseball and that no one else knew on the team. And in the beginning, the first person to go, it was hard. But by the time we got through like 10 and 12 guys and everyone started to kind of like loosen up, I mean, I learned things about guys that I hung out with in our rooms every single day that I had no clue. Something as big as, you know, like one of our teammates lost both of their parents when they were 12 years old in a car accident just like that. And then you start to realize, man, like it starts to make sense on why they're wired the way they are, and certain things make them tick. And I think that was his point, was just, you know, you don't know certain things about certain people, and you don't know why people react to certain ways or make decisions that they make. So don't be so quick to judge somebody. But what was eye-opening about that was, I think those of us that shared some of those tough stories didn't know the burden that we carried until it was said, until we said it to somebody, into a room full of people that we trusted. And from that point on, I put a huge value on just saying things that are on my mind, or, you know, or things that I think are hard, you know, for me to kind of comprehend, and just getting it out, because that weight that's lifted off of there, and that truly, as like cliche as that whole thing sounded in the moment, it worked. We became a lot closer, and we knew how to deal with each other differently, and we knew what made certain people tick, and that was a big part of it. But there's so many outside factors that go into where athletes dealing with. Was this something that you were aware of when you were younger? Like, did you know, like, were you aware of the mental side of it as a student going to college? Was that something that you valued and prioritized for yourself, or did you learn later, hey, I need to pay more attention to this and work on this?
I learned later. I grew up in that era of that, again, basketball reference, Michael Jordan mental toughness era, right? And so,
Yeah.
um, looking back, there's a lot of coaches who exerted that mentality of like,
Yeah.
mental toughness, um, and really like not even talking about it, but performance is a result of your resilience and overcoming obstacles and adversity and all these things we hear about, right? And I think about today in today's culture. And what's interesting is we have more of like this business culture. And so it's very interesting because on one side you have this culture of, branding and, uh, business and professional development, all this stuff, media. And then on the flip side, there's this mental health component of you need to be vulnerable. You need to open up. And it's almost like these things are, um, I don't want to say working against each other, but for the most part, a lot of people will separate them, right? When in fact,
Yeah.
the reality is they're actually one. It's just that people don't know how do you be vulnerable, but then you're giving an interview, right? And when
Hmm.
I say vulnerable, I don't necessarily mean you're expelling like your deepest, darkest secrets, but it's how are you being honest about a situation and not just saying, oh, it was a good game, I could do this better. We all hear those in
Yeah.
interviews. And so I think years ago it was always there, right? You always had some element of support and trying to figure out like how to navigate that space. But I think today it's just more it's out there, it's out in the forefront. You hear about it every day. um, it's what everything from the transfer portal to NIL deals to um, schools upgrading to switching conferences. There's just so much going on. And I think,
Yeah.
not to say it was uh, more simple back then, but I think now you just have more layers on top of everything. So student athletes
Yeah.
today they just have a lot more to deal with, and trying to figure out how to deal with it. Like, I, I don't begrudge them, because like I don't know if I'd be able to do it in today's culture that will either.
Yeah.
So but the support system is
Yeah.
there, is what I want to say. It's the
Yeah.
support system is there, and at least there's more of a culture of being open to that support system.
Yeah, I wanted to ask you this. You kind of just touched on it. What is your overview of the whole landscape now? I know my opinion from when I played to even coached to now with the NILs, the transfer portal. What do you think that's doing to college sports on a general level? I mean, I'll tell you right now, like, I know for me, it was really, really, really important on where you chose to go to school. And that was a big decision. And then now with a lot of the athletes that we work with, not to say it's not a big decision, but the athletes have a little bit more control now,
Mhm.
right? And I'm learning now because when the transfer portal first came, I just finished with coaching. So I was really in the mindset of a coach, like, man, that's going to be tough. A kid can come and then leave, right? But now working with athletes a little bit more, I do think there's a ton of value. But what's your overall view of the way that college sports is now from that standpoint?
Well, first I would say, not just with colleges, but at any level, what happens at one level always affects another level. And we've seen this with professional sports, right? In the domino effect, in terms of like training and sports performance, right? They have these combines, and then at the college level, they're starting to do a lot more emphasis on preseason, right? And so
Mm-hmm.
I think it's interesting what's happened, because, like, looking at it objectively, right? Um, we've had a system that's operated for so long, and nobody's really questioned it, or there's always been student athlete advocacy. But now, what a time period where student athletes have a lot more control over their situation. And so I think right now what we're seeing is just at a micro level in athletics is part of a macro level of what's happening in the world. And so if
Yeah.
you look at even decisions that the average person is making, right, coming out of college or whatever, you hear this, I want to be a YouTuber or whatever. But it's the
Mm-hmm.
entrepreneurial mindset. It's like it's going from, I'm a, not to take this negatively, but like I'm a cog in the wheel. Like I want to work for this organization, right? It's that sort of mindset of like, I want to do this
Mm-hmm.
and be a part of this bigger thing. Whereas now it's kind of flipped. It's, I want to I want to be in charge. I want to own my own situation and be in control. And so I think we'll see that happen in the athletics realm, where student athletes want to have more control, have more ownership of their situation, and not feel like they're stuck in a system where they can't do much. That's
Yeah.
and not just
Yeah.
and not just athletics. We always hear student athletes are transferring or taking deals for certain reasons, but sometimes things just aren't a good fit. And how many
Yeah.
stories have we not heard about of student athletes from years ago that, maybe they got to a place that wasn't a good fit, or the coach left, and they stayed.
Yeah.
They stayed for their duration. And maybe that affected their experience and they didn't like it. We don't hear about those
Yeah.
stories as much, right? But what
Yeah.
we do hear about today is, oh, this student athlete's transferring how many times, or they're taking this deal, or, but we're not seeing the bigger picture. We're only looking at it from a point in time of right now. We're not looking at it compared to
Yeah.
previously.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, and a lot of my friends will probably not like, a lot of my coaching buddies probably won't like this, but I think it holds the coaches and the universities more accountable.
Mm-hmm. one Hundred
It's
percent.
not as, not that recruiting is ever easy, but you have to be more accountable as a coach and a recruiting coordinator. The things you tell a student athlete, they got to be right, and or you got to at least be honest. There was a part of it, before all of this, where it was just about getting the athlete. Just go get them. Once you got them on campus, then we'll see how it all works out, and we'll decide. The biggest factor you had to decide was how much scholarship money is it going to cost us? How do we manipulate our scholarship fund, and how much is it going to cost us? And I'll be honest. I mean, I went through it with my transfer. I had a limited amount of schools that I can go to. There was either you're not transferring or you're going to these three schools,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where I went. I went to one of those three schools. Um, but now, when I work with some of the student athletes, it's funny you say that. It's not always that they're running away from not playing or they're running away from something. It's because, hey, it wasn't a good fit for me, or I realized that I made a decision that wasn't the right decision because they're 18 and they're 17 years old.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of times when you get somewhere, you're still learning yourself and you're still changing. And even to the parents aspect, I think it's a big relief for them too, because you don't feel like you're handcuffed and you don't feel like you don't have as much control um, over it. So I'm definitely interested to see where it goes, but I do like it because I do think it makes universities competitive. I do think it makes, touching back on what you talked about before, some of those universities will now have a real chance to exercise and show the total
Mm-hmm.
picture of the kind of school and university you'll go to. It gives them a chance, because once a student's exposed to one thing, now they know a little bit more about what they like and what might work for them. So I agree with you on that. I think it's interesting, and I think it's going to continue to play itself out. But there are a lot of stresses that come with this now. So we have a few high school student athletes who are highly recruited on the football side, and it's amazing the NIL stuff for young student athletes. I mean, there's people who are trying to sign them to the rights to represent them, and they're not agents. And I'm not knocking anybody. I mean, everybody, there's some great people who are doing it and just kind of ahead of it and passionate about it and helping kids out. But there's a lot of choices to be made, and parents are kind of like, I don't know what to do. This is all brand new, and I think that also leads down the road of stress and trying to make the right decision. Um, Out of curiosity, I mean, I know, you know, individually you don't really have any, and either do I. But how do you feel about that and what that does to a young student athlete? The ability for the NILs. It could be as early as high school. I mean, we have a bunch of high school football players here in Jersey at some of the really good schools that are already doing it. How do you feel about that?
Well, first, I think it's important to note for parents who are listening, and also for student athletes, particularly high school student athletes, right? One of the pieces of information that came out more recently that's always been around is that an athletic scholarship is a year to year, right? It's a lot of people have this misconception of they get recruited to this place and they go there and they're locked in for 4 years with that extra five, which is actually not true. Every year, a coach has to go through the roster and they have to say, do I want to retain this student athlete on scholarship?
Mm-hmm.
And in some cases, there's opportunities for redshirting or Division two, like there's partial scholarships and full scholarships, and they could interchange those. And so there's a lot that could happen, and I think that's you have to start with that first because a lot of people think it's I'm here, this is it. And there's a story about a volleyball program, and I don't remember what the name of the school was off the top of my head, but I remember the coach was fired and a new coach came in. And I think the previous year, um, either they didn't win a game or they won like very little games. The coach came in and literally cleaned house and took all the student athletes that were on scholarship and just started from scratch.
Yeah.
And a lot of people were shocked because usually, when a new comes in, they might retain a certain amount of student athletes to main, for the culture or for the, if they're in their senior year and you don't want to do that to the student athlete. But this coach came in and just was like, nope, I'm starting from scratch. And they all had to figure it out. And so I think that could be scary from the perspective of a
Yeah.
student athlete, not just pre-transfer portal, but even currently, because the transfer portal that we have now is massive, and
Yeah.
so you're not just competing against student athletes who are deciding to transfer. You're competing with ones who their athletic scholarships weren't renewed. So it's twofold, right? And so
Yeah.
to talk about your point about this whole representation, so that's like another piece. I think again, starting with basic education, it's important for parents to know uh, what do I do? Where do I seek information if I don't know what to do? And a good starting point, anytime you're dealing with contracts, is to find someone who either knows law, whether they have like their JD or they work in contractual law. And you have a lot of lawyers, but not all lawyers are um, have an understanding of contract law because contract law is very specific. And so I think
Hmm.
having someone or a law firm to like look over contracts, I think is important. You may end up paying a nominal fee, but in that nominal
Yeah.
fee that you get the peace of mind of knowing what's in the contract, um,
Yeah.
and like a breakdown of what does this mean for me in not in
Yeah.
legalese, but in you know basic English.
Yeah. Yeah. I think that's a good aspect. There's nothing that can replace peace of mind. I know situations financially are different for everybody, but I want to be clear with every student athlete. There's going to be, not by everybody, but there's going to be oftentimes a statute of time and urgency put on these decisions. And the few NIL deals from athletes that we work with, that's been attached to all of them. Sign this by this date, or you move on. And you'll see that oftentimes too with universities. And there's some truth to it. I don't want to make it sound bad. There's some truth to it with recruiting. When I was recruiting, you know, I had to go. I had a job to do, and I had to bring in student athletes, and I had to sit down with my AD every year and our head coach and tell them why this kid's at our school, and why they are producing or they aren't producing. So you would give offers to a couple different kids who you liked. So there is a sense of urgency for sure on that aspect, because if one athlete does decide to take the scholarship, we only have so much of a budget to work with. But the other side of it is just get it looked over and make sure before you make any decision like that, you have all of it checked out, because it's a lot of pressure when you feel like, I don't want to miss this opportunity. This is what I'm looking for. This looks great. And I can speak to the parents on this one, because they're mainly the driving force, because in the back of their mind, they know what's right. But then there's also pressure from your kid and the parents and of other athletes and the athletes on your team who are doing it and are signed and are seeing success with it. But I appreciate what you said, and just make sure you do your due diligence on all of this, because one bad mistake on that end could be detrimental. And not to put fear, but just take that for that what it
It,
is.
yeah, it,
If
it, it goes back to what I said with the health professionals, right? They're the experts for a reason, right? So
Yeah.
if you're unsure or you think you may do more damage by making the executive decision by yourself, either as a student athlete or as the parent, always
Yeah.
bring in the expert because they're going to be able to guide you and give you that peace of mind and understanding of knowing like how to deal with this situation in the best way possible.
Yeah. I'm going to put you on the spot. I'm going to ask you a really general big question. You're in a room right now, and you're in a room full of student athletes and parents,
Hmm.
and they're all in high school and they're on their way to go to college. And so for all of them, it's new. And the process is different for each one of them, but it's getting close to decision time. What would be a main variable or something that you would just say to a room full of people who are all different experiences but kind of going on the same journey? What would be a piece of advice that you feel could resonate with anybody who's going through it, who's listening to it, a parent or a student athlete, when it comes to making a decision on where to play or where to further your education or how to go about the process at looking for a school if they've never been through it before, and based off of what you've seen and what you've been through and what you're currently doing, would you have a piece of
Hmm.
advice for a room full of people?
Yeah, they don't. So for a disclaimer, they don't like this piece of advice in the business world, but I'll say it for anyone who's ever played athletics in any capacity. Go with your gut, go with your instinct, right? Um, and trust it. As a parent, not even as a student athlete, as a student, if you go on campus and you don't have a good feeling, if you're like, this doesn't feel like the place for me, you're go with that intuition. And a lot of times I think it's the lights, the shiny lights, like, but I could be here and I could be in this situation. It could look better, but does it feel better? Right. And so I think that's the important part is there's this, there's this concept of like going against what we're called to do and our purpose or where we're supposed to be. And there's a saying, and I'm sure you've heard this in recruiting world, um, don't go. It's not. Let me flip the negative. It's go where you're recruited the hardest, right? If a school and a place, and but then that's also saying too is like it's a good fit for you as well. But let's say you had two options, right, of two schools, and there's a school that's big state university, right, and that's the
Yeah.
place that's going to look good, and you go there and you're like, I feel like a number. I don't feel like I fit in. I just feel like this is very static. Nothing excites me,
Yeah.
but it's big state university. Or there's small school college, and you go to small school college, and as soon as you get on campus, they greet you, "Hey, how you doing? Da da da. Want to introduce you to
Yeah.
such and such." And you're like, "Wow, they really treated well here. I feel like this is a good environment. There's more of like a family element. You know, uh, I got to meet student athletes and just students on campus. Students are talking to me too. It's this like combination of everything feels right. It's the right fit, as they like to say.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that goes without saying is that you have to weigh your options, pros and cons. And so you may choose big state university, but just know that if you choose big state university and it doesn't go your way, you have to be honest with yourself about why didn't it work out. And so that's
Yeah.
something I have to. There's a good story that I have to share with you, and that's
Yeah.
going back to playground basketball history. There was a cat named James Fly Williams from Brooklyn, and this guy could jump out the gym. And this was, I don't even want to say the time period. It's 60s, maybe earlier. This is like pre Julius Dr. J. Irving, right? And this guy, he was just a talented individual. And he was recruited by a lot of places, and he was from Brooklyn. And the school that he ended up choosing was Austin Peay University in Tennessee. And people were like,
Yeah.
you're from like the city. Like, why did you choose Tennessee?" Like they thought he was nuts back then. But he said, every time I
Yeah.
go there, I'm treated so well. And I think they, don't quote me on this, but I think they retired his jersey. And he would always go back and he just felt like he was welcome. and it was like his home
Yeah.
away from home. And I never forgot that story because it's so relevant today, with a lot of student
Yeah.
athletes that find the right fit and they have like a similar story. And it's like, how did you get here? And it's
Yeah.
like, I was treated well. This was my place. This was my home away from home.
Yeah, absolutely. No, that's that's great advice. And I think the cool thing about that is that adults, parents can relate to that because it's almost like choosing a job too, right? Like you kind of know in your gut, can you excel here? Are you wanted here? Are you, respected there? And for the colleges, it's easy for student athletes to convince themselves, oh, I could do it here. I could see it. I could see the bright lights. I could be. It's easy, and that's often the recruiting tactic. Hey, we'll bring you in. You'll come to a Saturday football game. You'll see the 100,000 people screaming at the football field, and we'll put you on the sideline. And there might be 20 other recruits with you, but you're there, and it's easy to get drawn into that. But the people who really, really, really put the effort in and make contact with you and are checking in with you and know you a little bit deeper are the ones you should really give some time to think about, because ultimately I always say this: every coach's job is on the line every year, and the ones who really value you are the ones that are counting on you to come in a really long way, but to save their job or have them keep their job. They need you to be successful. So some of those smaller schools, just the efforts they put forward, and when you have that kind of attention, I think you should really, really put time to it. So, I mean, that's a really good advice. I think everyone should take.
In the science
And
world, there's a term for that which you described with, oh, I could do it, oh, I could excel. It's called the Donning Kruger effect. It basically is like when you become adept or knowledgeable about a certain like area and skilled in a certain
yeah,
area, you have this like air of confidence about you, like, oh, because I know this little thing, I could do this bigger thing or conquer this much much more grandiose problem. And that's not always true, right? Just because
yeah,
you might have invented this widget doesn't mean you could start the next mega corporation, whatever. So it's
yeah,
the same thing with student athletes and their athletic abilities. Like just because you excelled at one level does not mean like that will always translate to the next level. Like there's
right,
also a learning curve to that. And I think
yeah,
uh, if you watch professional sports, you see a lot of that with they were highly successful in college and they get to pros and they're the rookie. It's like starting all over again.
yeah,
And so I think
yeah,
for student athletes come out of high school, they need to know it's great that you were like your school's all-time leading scorer and you were an All-American. And
yeah,
guess what? Half of your team in college has the same sheet as you, and so
yeah, yeah.
like it needs to translate. But then also like don't think just because you did here you could do it here. It's like you need to still put in that work to get the same results.
Absolutely, and I think what you're surrounded with and the support you have around you is probably the best way to continue to grow, to compete. I mean, you said that by far. When anyone ever asked me what the big difference was, when I went to St. John's, they were number 16 in the country, and when I left high school, I had every accolade that you could think of. When I got to St. John's, it was like, well, it actually none of that mattered. Legitimately, none of that mattered because every person there has already had a year under their belt at least. I was a pitcher, so everyone in our lineup, there was no slouch. I mean, everyone was there for a reason, and they were there to do their job. So the best thing I had was good coaching, good support. But you nailed it professionally, and I was going to say that when you were bringing up your point, you can look every single year and see someone that was a superstar in college that either never translates in the pros or it just takes time. Even this year, look at Caitlin Clark, for example. I mean, the biggest college basketball player, that I've seen, and not that she's playing poorly, but she has a lot of attention on her. Her game is under a magnifying glass, and it's taking a while to translate. Or football, you could look at Tim Tebow, arguably one of the best college players of all time. And I could tell you it didn't translate to the NFL. He played a little bit with my Philadelphia Eagles, and that didn't go well. But just to your point, like, it just doesn't automatically translate. There's a lot of factors that go into it, and sometimes it's just not meant to be. But so putting yourself in a situation where you could feel like you can grow, because you are going to grow and you're going to continue to change. So, yeah, that's really good
And
advice. And I think
oh, good. I'm
go
sorry.
ahead. No, I was just gonna say, I think any student athlete or parent listening to that should really take time and think on that.
Yeah.
On your point.
So, as someone who's been in the girls' women's basketball space, I could say that the attention on the WNBA now is more than it's ever have been. I was a fan of the original Houston Comets dynasty. That's how I got into it years ago. Was NBA/WNBA on NBC, and I used to watch the early days of the league. And
Yeah.
and today the media coverage is just so profound, and so
Yeah.
this goes back to what we were saying about the pressure applied, and we think there's a lot of pressure at the college level from the high school level, but then there's also that same pressure from the college to the pro that translates to. I think we'll see in this play out with conversations. We'll see in this play out with people who have opinions about WNBA or coaching or skill set or whatever, and they're not in the space. It's just they're just giving their
Yeah.
opinion, and so we'll see in a lot more opinions, and there's a lot more attention, and that's also something that could take away from the student athlete experience and the focus. And the second thing I want to head on to is that you talked about well, what did we talk about before Tim Tebow? I just forgot.
We got Caitlin Clark. We got Tim Tebow.
Oh,
And
individual. Okay,
then
I remembered. So there's a difference, and I think there's a huge misconception that a lot of people don't talk about. But perfect timing. The Olympics is coming up, and I know a lot of people are going to be watching. There's a
yeah.
huge difference between individual sports and team sports. So when you're a swimmer, for example, and there's criticism, you're the individual, right? And granted, they do have swimming's kind of like wrestling where you're a part of a team per se that's bigger, but you're still an individual,
Yeah.
right? You're swimming as you as a person, not as part of a team. And not talking about the
Yeah.
country you represent, just you as an individual. When you play on a team, basketball, football, baseball, whatever, it's easy to say they're not living up to their expectation. But there's a team dynamic that's involved. And I think a lot of people forget that because, even, again, going back to my Jordan reference of the 90s, right? Jordan, when he came on the Bulls in that 90s era, he had to figure out, how do I talk to management about getting a team together and finding players to fit their role, and
Yeah.
that's difficult because you look at today's culture, you may have 5 players on a team or football bigger, baseball bigger, and they're like, I want to do this. And then instead of I want to do my role, everyone has their role, right? And so we
Yeah.
become a lot more individualized as a society, which isn't bad by all means. It's just it's what's happening, right? The skills are higher.
Yeah.
A lot of people are like, I can score. I want to do this. The pitcher's like, I want to hit home runs. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
Keep
Yeah.
me in. I want to bat. And so, but I think it's important to always keep that in mind with sports is that you have individual and you have team. And so anytime you're
Yeah.
talking about a player who's on a team, there's always a team element, which is a lot bigger than just that person.
That's very true. I wanted to ask you this. I got one more question
Sure.
for you. I know I said the last one I want to put you on the spot, but I'm interested to hear this. What does now where you currently are, because we talked about it a little bit earlier, what does mental toughness mean to you? And I'm truly interested to hear your opinion on this, because I have my opinion, but and when I was playing and brought up mental toughness meant something which I think was different back then. But what does mental toughness mean to you?
Yeah. That's a great question. Mental toughness, if you want to break it down to me, it's like taking a pie chart, and you have different elements that are included in this concept. We'll call it a concept, right? Because toughness, like as it relates from one person, doesn't mean the same thing to another person. It's subjective,
Mm-hmm.
right? I um, I know for coaches, their idea of mental toughness may look different than student athletes.
Mm-hmm.
So, as part of that pie, I like to include things like resilience, adaptability, communication, um, performance, physical health, and then also the other side, which is like more of like the brain health, nutrition, more of that sort of
Yeah.
ecosystem. So I think it's this
Yeah.
combination of things. For me, it's, a lot of people think when they think about mental, what's it called? Mental toughness. They go right away and they think of all things that are just 100% mental. But I bring this back to some of my research is like the physical affects the mental affects the physical. You have the
Yeah.
spiritual element, however you want to describe that, and it's you as a person. You are like a holistic person, so you can't just say like everything is mental, so we need to only focus on the mental, because if you don't take
Yeah.
care of your physical self, that's going to affect your mental, right? And just to give an example of that, um, there's a thing called brain fog that people get, right? As
Mm-hmm.
particularly as they get older. But like you could have brain fog. Think about if you're taking a test and think of like
Mm-hmm.
SATs or something like that. And maybe this test is like an hour, 2 hours, sometimes 3 hours. You're just like, oh my gosh, this is a
Yeah.
long test. And you start to get like kind of like jaded a little bit, like this brain fog. And
Yeah.
so it's like, why am I getting brain fog? Well, you did you stay up the night before? Your quality of sleep was low. Okay. What did you eat?
Mm-hmm.
You didn't really eat anything before the test. You had a granola bar. Great. That didn't help so it's like everything
Yeah.
is connected. And so the adaptability part, I think that's one piece that you hear a lot about with like jobs and in the market as far as like being a soft skill. And so I think
Yeah.
anytime someone could adapt to a situation, student athletes notorious for being adaptable to situations. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, what do I do in this
Yeah.
situation? I need you to switch to this position. I need you to do. Okay, sure. Um,
Yeah.
but not everyone can do that, and not well. I should say, not everyone can do that well. And so I think part of having mental toughness is not being so rigid all the time, is being able to like,
Right.
okay, this situation's happening. I don't know what to do, but let me think about it different. Let me stand over here instead of standing here. It's just like
Yeah.
a small switch in your mind. Um,
Yeah.
and then obviously the resilience piece that goes without saying. Um, and the nutrition kind of ties back to what I just said. So, did I leave anything out?
No, I actually I love that, Casey. I never thought about that way. As simple as a pie chart, because everything's not always going to go your way, and I feel like any time that I've gotten in trouble mentally was putting so much emphasis on an outcome, where if it didn't go my way, I didn't always have that check system. Okay, like, and when I think about what you said, the way that I correlated is the pie chart can sometimes move, and sometimes something weighs greater than the other.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
But the ability to hit those checkpoints, to stay in control of yourself, and to stay mentally tough, is a great way to look at it. Because when I felt like when I was younger, mental toughness was, I'll say it was show no weakness, always come out on top, and that's probably all how I would have answered it back then. That's
Mm.
probably what would have been my answer for sure. But to hear the way that you break it down, I think is a really good way for people to brainstorm on it and what it means for them. I appreciate that answer a lot. I think
Yeah.
that's a really good outlook.
One quick thing I'll hit on that last part. I just remembered communication. I want to bring that up.
Yeah.
How is communication
Yeah.
related to mental toughness? And the example I'll give is positive self-talk. What is that? What
Yeah.
does that look like? It's just, oh, that was a good shot. Like, you don't have to say that out loud, or, wow, I hit that out the park. Like, good hit. Like, it's just
Yeah.
kind of like reaffirming, like, celebrate the small wins. And anytime you do something, like, just give yourself that grace to do that. Again, I'm going to make one last reference. Playground basketball legend John Strickland used to play for the New York
Yeah.
Knicks. Most people know him from the park. He's another Brooklyn guy, but
Yeah.
John Strick, he used to always say, "Finish your breakfast," and it was a term he would also toss out to people when he was playing, like finish what you start, like finish the layup, whatever. And so what he would tell people is things that he would do himself. Like he would tell people like finish your breakfast, but then he would do it. Like so, he was always practicing what he
Yeah.
preached. And the one the one phrase he's also known for, which is like is comical. He was very entertaining. He would always say left hand, right hand, because he would be able to make shots with both hands. So he would
Yeah.
show the audience. He would communicate. This is the example I'm giving, for mental toughness. And he would say left hand, right hand, left hand, right hand. And it was his way of positive, like I could use both hands, like doesn't matter. Um,
Yeah.
and so I always like that when I see student athletes or players that have that air of confidence, and
Mm-hmm.
it's not you're not overreaching, right? You're not jarring at someone else. You're just kind of like
Yeah.
giving yourself that credit, like yeah, I did that, and I think
Yeah.
not all the time, it's just sprinkling it in every once in a while to show people like I'm mentally tough.
Yeah. Yeah. That's really cool. That leads me. I have to get in my Eagles point, but one of my favorite quotes is from Jalen Hurts, and it was a simple answer, and I forget exactly what the question was, but it had something to do with his mental toughness and his work ethic, and he's well regarded across the league for his work ethic and all that. And his answer was simple, and it was just the rent is due. And when I thought about that, I'm like, wow, you know, that's really cool. And they asked him to elaborate on it, and he said, it's just what I promised to myself. It's just like when you're living somewhere and you have to pay your rent. Certain characteristics of what I hold myself to and the accountability I hold myself to, that's my rent. And I pay my rent every day. Pay my rent every day. And I loved that one,
Hmm.
which is kind of similar. It's just kind of like putting it in your mind, and communicating it to yourself, and then holding yourself accountable, right? And
Hmm.
just getting it done. And that to me is a cool way to look at it as well. So I guess the point of saying that is you brought up example, I bring up example, and I want everyone to understand that it doesn't look the same for everybody. And it's a big step to learn yourself and be honest with yourself and figure out what works for you within the parameters that successful people use it, and then just capitalize. And it will change. It'll continue to change. And I think I'm speaking mostly to, well, maybe I think even adults can use it. But if you're young and you're still trying to figure it out, maybe just write it out and then if you
Great
hit
idea.
what's important to you and your priorities, communicate it with yourself. Hey, great day. I did what I wanted to do, or I had it, and the self-talk and the communicating is huge. So, yeah, that's really cool. Casey, I can't tell you how much I enjoyed this conversation. I think for anyone listening, they're going to leave here with some really cool answers and also some things to think about. And that's all I ask, because for anyone who listens, mostly it's our student athletes and parents, and I feel like questions arise, and the best thing that we can do is just surround them with resources. And you're somebody that I admire, and I love the way that your brain works and the way that you think, and I've learned things even from you. I wish I knew you during my playing days. I could have utilized you a little bit more. But for anyone who listens to this and wants to dig deeper, what's the best way to communicate with you, is LinkedIn the best way for someone to connect
Yeah,
with
but
you?
before I put I'm gonna put some other people first that give credit where credit's due. So, for parents
Sure.
out there that want to gain more knowledge on mental health literacy, there's an organization called the Mental Health Literacy Collaborative, and they're
Okay.
based in Delaware, but you don't need to live in Delaware to be connected. And it's a variety of individuals from different backgrounds. Organization was founded by educators and health professionals, and
Wow.
um, it's it's just another tool to enhance your mental health literacy by having conversations with other people in that space. And so that's what they've done, and they're doing great work.
That's
So
awesome.
check them out. The other one for my student athletes out there, shameless plug, organization I am doing some work for is called the National Association for Athlete Mental Health,
Love it.
NAAMH. Um, again, if you want to check them out, you could go on naamh.org. And I think for the mental health literacy, I think it's the mhlc.org. Um, and as for me, if you want to get in touch with me, you could reach me LinkedIn. Professionals out there, if you don't have LinkedIn, my email is simply my first name, Casey.Rudzinski, my last name, at gmail.com.
That's awesome. I'm gonna grab those from Casey, the websites that he mentioned, and put them in the bio of this show for anyone who's interested. Just go to the bio. Actually, I recommend everyone at least check it out, and I know for sure I'm going to. But Casey, thank you a ton for your time, man. I hope this isn't the last time that we talk, and I know for sure that people will gain a lot out of this. But thanks for coming on, and thank you for your time, man.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I appreciate it. Great conversation.
Awesome. Awesome. All right. We'll talk soon.